Hey guys, this is Leo. I'm back with another episode of the DevDoc Diary series. Sat down today after work and decided to do a little bit of little more blueprint scripting here and a little bit more planning. I kind of split my time between planning and blueprinting. Yes, you can just jump into blueprint and start to kind of, freestyle it and start putting stuff together. I do that myself a lot of times when it's something that's pretty simple or I just want to prototype something super fast. But for the most part, the smart thing to do and the most efficient thing to do is to plan stuff out first, have some direction and a guide, and then go ahead and jump into blueprint and start to put stuff together. So let me show you what I'm talking about. If I jump over to XMind, and I talked about XMind in a podcast episode last week, I believe. I think it was last week. Maybe it was earlier this week. I don't even remember anymore. Anyway, XMind is a great tool that I use in my workflow. It's fantastic for organizing your dots and stuff. I don't remember if I talked about this in the previous video, but I have created this XMind doc and started to write down my ideas and sort of planning things out. So at the center idea for this mind map document is the game framework. So this is basically the game right here. Everything's going to connect to the game framework and just make everything tick. Make everything work. I'm not talking about tick like the event in Unreal. Anyway, so to get this game prototype as fast as possible and to get things going, you need, there's two really important things that you're going to need. Okay, you're going to need a player controller, and that's probably the most important thing, right? Your player controller, for those that don't know, is the how do I put this? It's what you use to reach into the world of your video game and run around and do stuff. So, for example, if you're playing Grand Theft Auto 5, the player controller is the player that you play as. Okay? If you're playing Resident Evil and you're playing the role of, Leon Kennedy or Jill Valentine, that character is you. That's the player controller. Player controller is basically the interface between you in real life and your character in the game. And the player controller controls a lot of things about what you do. It controls your actions, it controls your movements, it can control lots of different things. So the player controller is integral to getting things done. As you can see here, I put a red number 1 right here because that's a first priority item. That's the first thing I started to attack as I prototyped this game. So I broke down all the important elements that make up the player controller. So I've got the player controller here, and I broke that up into the different things that make up the player controller, or the different actions that you as the player have control over, right? So first over here on the left, you'll see movement. And under movement, I break down what kind of movement I need for the player controller. Player controller almost always is going to need movement. Whether you're controlling a ship in Eve Valkyrie or Ace Combat 5 or something like that, or an airplane or something, that's still a character controller you're controlling. So you're going to need movement. What kind of movement does your player controller need? Is it going to be a truck that has to be able to drive, turn wheels, go into reverse? Maybe it has a NOS or some kind of speed burst or something, so it shoots off for a second and moves really quick. All those kinds of things are things you got to think about. So in this case, my goal is to create, and I'll show you real quick. I showed this in the previous video, but I'll just recap it. It's basically like a person walking around kind of exploring the world. So it's more of an exploration sort of game. It's not a vehicle game. It's not a driving game or a flying game or a flight simulator. You're basically walking around. If I hold down the sprint button, I can run at twice the speed, so it's kind of like a fast jog. I can also crouch and walk a little bit slower as I crouch, and then stand back up and move at normal speed and stuff. And I've got a flashlight that I can use to explore stuff and so on and so forth. So my movement is broken down into walk because I need to be able to walk, and then there's the sprint, and then there's crouch. And you can see that I have little notes inside some of these nodes. So if I go to one of these nodes, I can see that here I put a note for movement about head bob. And I put down, I need to make the player camera head bob while moving. Bobbing should scale based on movement speed mode, like walk, sprint, crouch, walk. And what that basically means is there should be a little bit of head bob as you walk. And if you're walking, you get a little bit of head bob. If you're sprinting, you're going to get a lot more head bob because you're trying to run faster, right? Maybe you're trying to outrun a ghost or a monster or some kind of psychopath trying to stab you with a pencil or something, who knows. And if you're crouching, you're going to have obviously less head bob than if you're sprinting, and maybe even less than if you're walking, right? And I've got little notes here too. So I put here, crouch is a toggle. Use crouch button to toggle crouching on and off. And I put these notes so that Brandon and Larry, who are working on this game also, if they need to come in here and get familiar, say for example I go on vacation or I start working on some visual effects stuff or something, and Larry or Brandon comes in here and they want to work on this, and they're not sure what I did, they can just look at the notes and go, okay, sprinting works by holding down the sprint key, while crouching works as a toggle. You hit the crouch button to toggle crouching mode and then hit it again to stand up again. So very important to document and comment your work. Down here you can see that I created what is this, essentially a matrix down here in XMind. This is considered a matrix, and basically it describes some of the movement functions. So I know that here's my movement function head bob, and here's the description for what it does. Slight movement on player camera that scales based on movement mode, walk speed, crouch walk. Okay, just really important to make things very obvious and stuff. I may know what I'm thinking about, but that doesn't mean that other people on the team are going to know exactly what I'm thinking. It's very important to kind of spell this out and make it easy to understand, so someone doesn't waste time or have to call me or text me on my phone and say, hey, what in the world are you talking about here? Over here I've got actions, and actions are split up in a whole bunch of stuff. So first I've got a search button. So these actions are actual buttons. If I'm holding an Xbox gamepad, then these actions correspond to actual buttons on the controller. So the search button, okay, so let me go through the keyboard because right now I'm using a keyboard and mouse. The search button is activated by hitting the left mouse button, and it's a hold button, so you have to press it and hold it down to search for clues in the environment. When you let it go, you get out of search mode. And search mode, when you engage search mode, the camera will zoom in slightly, almost like your character's trying to focus on stuff. And if you spot something, and you can see here I've got a note, here's the description of the search function. So this function allows the player to search for clues. When the player holds down the search button, and I spelled that wrong, the search button, the camera zooms in and fires a spherical line trace for a short distance. If a clue is found with that spherical line trace in a short distance, then something happens, or something can happen. For example, we can play a sound cue, right? So maybe you hit the search button, you're walking around a room and there's a rope on the floor, and you kind of zoom in on it, and with the search button, if that's a key item that's supposed to be a clue for you to figure out a puzzle or where to go next, then maybe something will happen. Like a little sound cue plays that goes ding or something like that. And maybe you get a little UI hint that pops up on the screen, like a description. Maybe your character's talking to himself or thinking to himself, and you see, a little text on the bottom of the screen that says, a rope. I wonder what I could use that for. Or maybe a rope. I could use that to climb down that cellar or something like that, down a sewer drain, whatever it is, right? And then under search, because this is part of it, is zoom. I've got a zoom node here And that means if the player uses the interact, and this is actually updated. I first called it the interact button, but it wasn't specific enough, so I changed it to the search button, which made more sense to me. So anyway, if the player uses search button, but there's nothing to interact with, i.e. an interact object, then the camera zooms in slightly, like in the PT demo. So anyway, that note's pretty old, but that's what happens when you hit the search button. The camera zooms in, right? And now I've got a flashlight button over here, then an action button. And the action button used to be the interact button, but I changed it. I made it the action button because that makes more sense. So the action button, what that's going to do is that's going to start any type of contextual action. So you can see here I put use contextual. What that means is there's going to be interactive objects in this game, right, in the world. So the game takes place on this old Victorian style train. Imagine yourself in the train. There's lots of objects everywhere. There's a dining car. You're standing in the middle of a dining car. There's seats, there's tables, there's stuff on top of the tables. There's candlestick holders, little candles, and glasses of wine, and plates of food that are half eaten, and utensils like forks and knives and all kinds of stuff like that. There's windows, there's light fixtures with warm lighting going across the room, and the lighting isn't that strong, so there's very contrasty shadows around the corners of the room where the light can't exactly reach. And at the end of this train car is a door, and next to the door is a little keypad where you enter a numerical code, right? So imagine yourself in that train car. The action button, if you walk up to the to one of the tables with stuff on it, like I said, a glass of wine, a table, a dish with some half-eaten food, and then there's a very large knife that's stabbed into the table, right? Maybe you walk up to it and you notice that knife looks out of place. Maybe it has some dried blood on it or something like that. So you walk up to it, it looks different from everything else. And once you get close to it, like right up in front of it, you'll get a little contextual thing that tells you, oh, this knife, here's a weapon or whatever, right? If you hit the action button, you'll pick up the knife and it'll become a weapon in your inventory to use against enemies, right? Then you walk down the other end of the dining car to where the door of the keypad is. And when you go up to the door, that's also an interactive object, but it's not a weapon, it's a door. And a little hint pops up that says, press action button to use. You hit the action button, but the door is locked. So you get a little sound effect of like a locked door and a hint that says, the door's locked, I can't get through here. But there's a keypad. So you go up to the keypad, and when you get close to it, guess what? You get a little hint that says enter, code to unlock the door. And you use the action button to activate the keypad, and then there you can enter a code 1 2 3 4 whatever it is to open the door and move on. So that's what the action button does. And then of course it isn't a player controller without the ability to pause the game, right? So pausing a game is such a fundamental basic thing that all games have. So you pause the game. When you pause the game, a pause widget, a UMG pause widget pops up, and I should probably edit this to say pause UMG widget, right? And this opens up a menu. The game pauses, so everything stops, and you have the ability to hit the resume game button to continue playing. You have an options button. If you hit that, a new widget pops up, and now you have the options to change your display, like say the brightness of the screen, like the gamma or whatever. You have an audio option, controls, and then if you pull back to the options to this level of the menu where it says resume game options, you've also got a reload last checkpoint, just in case you want to reload last checkpoint. Or you can quit the game altogether, go back to Steam or PlayStation Network or whatever it is, to your Xbox dashboard or home screen or whatever, and go do something else. So that's pretty much it. And then over here I've also got inventory. This stuff I haven't even started really messing around with. I just put it down here for posterity, but eventually I'll have to go in and dedicate, you know, a week or a few days or whatever, however long it takes me to get a whole inventory system up and running. And don't worry, if you're curious about how that works, I'll be doing a whole vid doc series on how I get that stuff going. And then I went over movement functions, search functions, main menu. You need a main menu for the game. You don't need it for prototyping and testing yet. This is kind of a low priority item, so I put a blue number 3. So you can see as I click on these in XMind, I can give it a priority. So I could say, you know what, this is first priority. We need a main menu now, but we don't. So I'm going to put that as a priority 3. We'll need it, but we don't need it right now. But if I take the main menu and I break it down, it's pretty simple. So you load the game, the main menu opens up, and you have the ability to start a new game. If you've installed the game for the first time, that's what you'll want to do, right? You have the ability to load game. If you played the game last night and you made it to a certain point, you had to go to bed because you got work in the morning, now you want to play a game, or play again when you get home from work, or maybe you play at work. Who knows? Some people do that. I have coworkers that do that. I don't. I'm a hard worker. And you can load your previous game. You can also go to the options screen. Again, it's the same stuff. You've got display options, audio options, control options, and then you have the ability to quit the game. Maybe you clicked on this game and now you don't want to play anymore, so you change your mind in 2 seconds and you want to quit. Who knows? And then over here you can see I've got a priority 2 item, which is the game mode. Game mode is probably the second most important thing you're going to need when you're prototyping and creating a brand new game. First thing you need is your player controller, or else you can't interact with the world, right? You can't run around or jump or do anything. The next thing you're going to need is a game mode. For those that don't know, the game mode controls all the rules to the game. It also tracks different things. So each game is different. Obviously, a game mode for a racing game is going to be totally different and have completely different rules and objectives to a game mode for an action-adventure game like Resident Evil, right? So for this game mode, since this is an exploration single-player adventure game, I guess you could say, it's just going to have a campaign mode. There's no multiplayer or anything like that, unless the team decides, hey, we need multiplayer. We'll do a game mode for multiplayer, but right now there's just campaign. So if I open up the notes here, you can see I put a quick note. The campaign game mode will be based on objectives. As objectives are completed, the player progresses through the story. Pretty simple, basic stuff. And the game mode is going to have these different functions. So it's going to have a function to control player inventory, and so the player inventory is actually going to be controlled in the player controller. But the game mode is going to have certain controls over the player inventory, so that's pretty important. And we'll get into that when we'll cross that bridge when we get to it in a later episode of this VidDoc series. The game mode is also going to have a function that tracks game time. So if any of you out there remember the old Resident Evil games, I keep using Resident Evil as an example, but there's a lot of adventure games out there. I think Tomb Raider does it as well, where the game, behind the scenes, unbeknownst to you, keeps track of how long it takes you to beat the game. And for any of the old Resident Evil fans, like Resident Evil 1 and 2 and 3, those games used to track, secretly, they used to track how long it took you to beat the game. And I know in Resident Evil 2, if you beat the game like in under 5 hours or something like that, you unlock cool stuff. You might unlock new costumes for your character for your second playthrough. You might unlock a submachine gun with unlimited ammo. Spoiler alert for those who haven't played Resident Evil 2. Or you might unlock a new game mode. Like, I don't know if any of you out there remember, there was the mercenary game mode with Hunk. There was also, for those of you, I actually was such a huge nerd, I unlocked the mode that unlocked the Tofu character. For those that don't know about that, look up Resident Evil 2 Tofu on YouTube. It'll be very, very interesting. Anyway, This thing's going to also keep track of how many times you die or fail the game, so that at the end we can tally up that score and give you a rating. So if you never died and you beat the game really quick, maybe you'll get an A rating and unlock something cool, right? It could be anything. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. We haven't decided on what you'll unlock, if anything at all, but it'd be cool to track this stuff so that at the end of the game you can see like an end screen that shows you your total time, how many times you died or didn't die, how many times you saved your game, and then tally all this stuff up together and give you like a rating. Like you had an A rating, or maybe you had a B or a C rating, or whatever it is, right? And this game mode's also going to keep track of which objectives have been completed, because that's pretty important. And it's going to keep track of when you complete all the objectives in the game and you beat the game, it'll keep track of that, and it'll end the game. And maybe if we have the time and resources, we'll do like an end cinematic, or maybe we can do multiple endings. I mean, I don't know, but all that stuff will be controlled by the game mode, so that's pretty important. Up here I've got the interactive object parent class, and what this guy does, I haven't even started working on this yet. I just put it here in XMind just because I had to put it down for the future. But the interactive object parent class. So remember that example I gave you about picking up that knife off the table to use as a weapon? Or maybe you find a key card for that little door panel to get that thing open. Maybe like an employee ID card you find off a dead body or something in the cargo, I don't know, the cargo hold of the train or something like that, right? These interactive objects that you interact with to, first of all, an interactive object can be a door that you open. It can be a weapon you pick up. It can be a key card you pick up. It can be a door panel you interact with to unlock a door. It could be anything that you interact with. So I'm going to end up creating an interactive object parent class, and it's going to have a couple of key things. It's going to have a 3D mesh, which is most interactive objects are going to have a 3D mesh. I mean, if you think about it, if it's a weapon, if it's a door, if it's a key item, it's probably going to have some kind of 3D mesh. A mesh of a door, a mesh of a key card panel, a mesh of a knife or a gun, or a stick of gum. It could be anything, but it's going to need a 3D mesh component. It's also going to need a collision component with an overlap event, and this is going to be how we interact with it. So when the player gets close to this object and touches its collision, the object knows, oh, the player's touching me, let me send a signal to the player, and then the player can do all kinds of stuff. Like, for example, I can make the player see a little hint at the bottom of the screen that says, use the action button to open the door, or use the action button to pick up the knife to use as a weapon, or whatever it is. Obviously that's lame, but I think you get the idea. So it's going to need those two components. And then this is work in progress, but it's going to need some interact functions, or interaction functions, whatever you want to call that. But I'll worry about that later. I'm not going to worry about that right now. That's pretty much it. It's not that big of an XMind. I've actually created games where this XMind you zoom out like this, and this whole screen is just filled with tons of nodes and graphs. So it can get pretty crazy. Anyway, that's XMind.